The Roaring Knight in Deltarune is by far one of the greatest mysteries plaguing the Undertale fandom at the moment, and after the reveal in Deltarune Chapter 3 and the continued lore in Chapter 4, it has gotten me completely obsessed with this character once again. My thoughts have absolutely been all over the place. I have been non-stop studying the lore and Toby Fox's writing to know everything I possibly can about the Roaring Knight, and today I'm going to present my first theory regarding it. If you want me to continue making more Deltarune theories like this one, make sure to give me a subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it. Before diving deep into this theory, I want to preface this by saying that this video is not about theorizing the Knight's identity. The Knight identity theory will probably come out at a later date. I need more time on it. This theory is all about taking what the game is presenting us at face value and making theoretical conclusions for the Knight's character and their role in the Deltarune's narrative. I want to try to make this theory as down to earth as possible, meaning I want to try to form this theory without necessarily overreaching, meaning what the game is telling us is how we're going to interpret it, and we're going to use these loosely connected dots to form the theory together. So let's take everything that Deltarune Chapter 3 and 4 has told us and apply it to the Knight. In Chapter 3, the Knight was an absolutely insane reveal, going completely against our expectations for how the story is progressing. Chapter 4 takes it a step further and gives us even more insane reveals. After just revealing the Knight in Chapter 3 and then hiding away in the shelter, Kris and Susie attempt to look for a code to gain access to the inside of it. Turns out, it seems that Noelle's house has the code somewhere, as her mother, Carol, is the mayor of hometown. Naturally, she's going to have the codes. After going to Noelle's house, Carol finds out that they've been snooping and specifically kicks Susie out. However, Carol tells Kris that they're welcome back at any time. It's clear that Carol and the Knight are related to each other. In fact, it's pretty obvious that Toby wants us to think that they're the same person even, such as the descriptions of the Knight's attacks being symptoms of hypothermia, and how Carol literally feels ice cold when she puts her hand on her shoulder. Not to mention the extremely suspicious katana that Carol just has for some reason. Natural to have that, I guess. So yeah, there is a lot of evidence linking Carol to being the Knight, and even if I don't agree with that conclusion, Toby wants us to believe this. So let's say conclusively, Carol is the Knight. Why is she doing these things? Why would she want to cause the roaring to happen? Isn't the roaring like one of the all-time worst things possible to happen in this story? Like, Rouse plays it up pretty big, and hell, we even fight a Titan at the end of Chapter 4, and we can see how destructive they are. So Carol has to have some sort of motive to create these dark fountains and cause the roaring, right? Why would she want to end the world? Well, we might actually have an answer based on everything going on. Now, please, I know this is scary, but unfortunately, I have to bring up our good pal, WD Gaster. Yes, I know what you're gonna say. I know that Gaster isn't the answer to everything, but I promise you, it's just gonna be a light little bit of Gaster. So it's pretty clear at this point that Gaster is the one creating Deltarune, right? From the Twitter account being taken over by him, to his voice being written in the same way that Gaster speaks, to references in the religion, to entry number 17, to the Deltarune website calling Deltarune Gaster's next experiment. At the end of Chapter 4, he calls it My Deltarune. With all that evidence, it's very likely that Gaster is the one making Deltarune, and by correlation, was also likely the one that wrote the prophecy, especially considering he's the first one that said the prophecy before Chapter 1 even launched. Either way, there's a reason I'm bringing this all up. Whether you believe that this voice is Gaster or not, this voice, whoever they are, very clearly has an important role in the story, and this voice is also very likely the antagonist of Deltarune as well. However, being the main antagonist doesn't make him necessarily the Knight. So, where does our good old friend Gaster fall into the story? Well, Gaster isn't the only one that likes lingering around in the game files. There's actually another character that also seems to be stuck inside the game's code, although it doesn't look like it was from their choice. Yes, I think the easiest way for anyone to see this without much data mining skill is in Chapter 1. Going into the JSON file in the language folder and scrolling all the way down to the bottom, there's actually dialogue that's intentionally labeled as unused Chris, and it's Des calling out for help. So obviously, in the real world, Toby Fox is the one making this game, but in universe, Gaster / The Voice is the one doing it. He's the one writing the prophecy. He's the one that's determining the game's future. And if he's the mastermind behind Deltarune's creation, then he must also be the one to trap Des inside the game files, right? Remember back in the early days of Deltarune releasing and everyone thought Kris was evil, or in chapter 2 even, where everyone thought that Kris was a knight, or at the very least had some sort of nefarious intentions. Well, in chapter 3 and 4, honestly, they aren't portrayed as having sinister intentions at all. Let me ask you, what does Kris do in chapter 4 after taking out your soul and shoving it in the present box? Yeah, they make chocolate milk of all things. What do they do after that? Play the piano in the most beautiful way possible. In the church scene of chapter 4, after Susie tells her story of the piano and you select the option to never play again, Kris actually self-harms to stop themselves from saying that. It's clear that Kris does not want you a part of them. They don't want you taking control of their lives. Hell, they were even the one that brought Birdly to the hospital in the weird route after you turned them into frozen chicken. These examples don't seem like examples of someone who has some kind of immoral intentions. In fact, based on all these examples, it gives off the vibe that Kris just doesn't want this. They don't want you in their life. It's to the point where they can't even physically sleep when you're inside them. I mean, would you want someone controlling your body and making decisions that affect your life? Completely changing people's perceptions and how they view you as a person? No, I honestly wouldn't either. I'm gonna be honest. This is where Carol, Gaster, and Kris's destinies intertwine with each other. Gaster is the man who's making this entire story, right? And if Gaster has Des locked away in the game files, it's natural that Carol will do absolutely anything to see her again. I mean, Des is her literal child. If it's to see her kid again, then maybe she deems it worth to cause the roaring. I mean, a lot of moms out there would do anything for their children. This also brings us to Kris's motivation as well. Kris was the one that warned Carol of us finding the code to the shelter and Des's guitar. Why would they do that necessarily? Well, it's because they have another person in their body that they can barely deal with. Toby Fox said himself that among everything, he wants us to see the ending to this game. In fact, the entire point of creating this game was so that we could eventually see the ending. That holds truth in the literal game universe as well. Once the game is finished and we have finally reached the ending, we won't be intertwined with Kris anymore. They won't have to put up with us and they can finally get their life back to normal. Carol likely has a similar motivation. There has to be a reason that Des is trapped inside the game files, right? It's likely at some point in the prophecy, Des is gonna be needed for something. And so once the prophecy is over, at that point, Carol can finally see her daughter again. This is why Kris and Carol want to cause the roaring as fast as they possibly can. They both were super negatively affected by the prophecy. And once the game ends, the prophecy is over. And they have hope that they can possibly return to their normal lives. Thanks for watching. YouTube thinks you'll like this video, so why not see if they're right?